You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Live tropical weather bulletin for July 30th. That it is, and we have these two systems active right now. What's left of Douglas is still alive. It's not a tropical cyclone though, and Potential Tropical Cyclone 9 still hasn't got itself a name or indeed tropical storm status yet, as it continues through the Eastern Caribbean. Day 60 of Atlantic hurricane season, we've got another area of interest that we've marked a big 10% on further east. That's the wave near the Cape Verde Islands right now. That could become a tropical cyclone. Day 77 in the Eastern Pacific, the remnants of Douglas about to reach the international dateline. The National Hurricane Center have designated the 10% area that we designated yesterday, I think it was. We've taken it off now, interestingly enough. And in the Western Pacific, we've got those three areas, still low chances at the moment in the next 5 days, but I think we're going to get something out of this in the first days of August. In the North Indian Ocean and elsewhere around the world, in fact, nothing's going on, so we don't really have to look at those areas very much. And that's the tropics in a nutshell. Here's the latest satellite imagery then of the Atlantic right now, and we're still monitoring, of course, Tropical Disturbance 9. Still hasn't got a name. I think that's confusing quite a lot of people as to why it doesn't have a name yet, and I wonder if one of my team might want to care to explain it. We're joined by 7 other people tonight. We're joined by Preston, Codemo, Devon, Nuke, Strat, Samuel, and Wyatt. Good evening to you all. Now, we've been watching 9L for a while, and it's been struggling to get its centre of circulation sorted out, and Strat, I think you noted consistently that it was potentially forming the circulation further south than what everyone was thinking.
Well, and it just doesn't have that quite yet, even though we're starting to potentially see some more
It would help if we could actually hear everyone. Well, you might want to start that one again.
Oh god. Okay.
No.
Similar to yesterday, to have a tropical cyclone be
I'm
named,
sorry about that.
it has to have a closed low-level center of circulation, which just doesn't have yet. Even though it's producing a significant area of tropical storm force winds, to be classified, it needs to have a closed low-level center, and it just doesn't have that yet, which has been confirmed by numerous reconnaissance planes over the past 24 hours, though. However, it is notable that it is producing tropical storm conditions over significant parts of the Caribbean right now, including starting to enter more parts of Puerto Rico right now and approaching the Dominican Republic. So just because it isn't a named storm yet, really doesn't discount the threats to land that it's bringing right now. And it is notable that as we head towards the next 24 hours or so, it is more and more likely this ends up getting named, just because we're starting to see some extra rotation try to spin up now. I'm pretty sure there's another reconnaissance plane coming in tonight, so we'll get some more information to see if things have changed in the past few hours.
Yeah, so everyone was hearing a little bit of music there for a moment whilst I was breathing or something like that. We're also have the return of Nuke tonight, which is interesting because I think the last time you were with us on a live stream was during Hurricane Matthew.
I think, yeah, that sounds about right. Yep.
And you were there prominently rather, during that stream, obviously, and you're in Florida, so I imagine you're watching the storm and many other people around you. What's the current thinking over there?
You know, it's not really, like, full-on, like, panic mode, I would say. Like, if this was, like, something like Irma, like, out this far, like, how Irma eventually became a major hurricane and stuff like that, we're not quite to that stage. This is they're only saying tropical storm status as you know, the cone could be a little bit off. But
Well, that's interesting because Mike was on last night's stream saying that they'd already ran out of water, I think it was.
Truth be told, I haven't been outside in the last 3 months, so I don't know. I haven't been to the store in like a whole half a year, so I don't know.
Fair enough.
But
That might
general
be it.
consensus from like my neck of the woods, no real like panic.
We're also joined by Wyatt for the first time tonight as well, also located in Florida, if I remember correctly, further up the coast. Is he there right now?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Good evening. What are your thoughts on Potential Tropical Cyclone 9? Do you think it might have formed? Are you surprised that it hasn't formed yet?
I mean, my thoughts on PTC 9, I mean, it is really interesting that it hasn't formed yet because 2 days ago, if I recall correctly, it was forecasted to become a tropical cyclone by this point, and it was also supposed to be significantly further north than it is now. And I am looking at satellite data, and it does appear that somewhere in the middle between the two areas of convection, something might be trying, spin up much further south than initially forecasted. So.
Yeah, you're starting to see plenty of rotation around there, but the ASCAP passes and recon leaving a bit to be desired.
Yeah, I think it's really a bit of an understatement. Even this morning we just saw a sharp trough axis from the wind data that we're getting for the reconnaissance, and still no close center quite yet. But again, it doesn't really change the impacts that are ongoing for parts of the Lesser and now Greater Antilles as well. Tropical storm conditions, heavy rainfall that can lead to flash flooding and mudslides are all potential impacts as we head through the next 24 to 48 hours.
And we've also got Devon here tonight as well, who's joining us from the moon, I think. Is that right?
That's pretty accurate right now, I would say.
What are your thoughts on potential TC9? I keep forgetting what the terminology is on all this. Potential Tropical Cyclone 9L. It's a mouthful.
Yes. The thing looks like a subtropical storm.
Yeah.
Honestly, this thing looks like that. It should be forming at about 40 degrees north and moving southward. I've not really seen anything like this in this area of the Atlantic. This is a massive system.
It is.
And the winds are extremely displaced from the supposed center of circulation, which I think is looking pretty well formed, almost due south and now a little bit west to south of Puerto Rico. So, I mean, it looks like the center's trying to coalesce in that area, but regardless if the center is trying to coalesce in that area or not, this thing's producing tropical storm force winds way away from the center of the storm. It honestly looks more like a subtropical cyclone than a traditional tropical one, which is weird for the end of July, beginning of August, at about 12.5 degrees north. It's just not what you would expect to see at all.
Very strange.
This storm's going to run ahead. I mean, this storm looks like it's moving due west right now.
It is. It's got to be.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's moving due west right now and has been moving due west. It's been predicted to move north for ages.
And the National Hurricane Center keeps saying that it is moving west-northwest. They've said it for quite a while. It's just that I don't see it being true.
It's not. I don't think that it is. I mean, maybe the wave as a whole is moving west-northwest, but where the center is, where quote-unquote center actually is, looks like it's moving due west on the thing. It's like right in the middle of the Caribbean rather than more towards the north of it, like you would expect for a storm like this. Like I said, it's just really, really weird system to be in the Caribbean. It takes up almost a full 10 by 10 latitude by longitude grid, which is massive. The fact that this thing's producing 50-knot winds in Puerto Rico when it's absolutely nowhere near Puerto Rico doesn't surprise me a single
Yes. The more I look
sorry
at this satellite imagery, Strat, when you look at the wider shot, you can sort of see where the National Hurricane Center is saying it's going west-northwest because the center of the whole thing is. But it looks like it's pulling itself apart right now, and you can see the rotation's getting a bit stronger in the Eastern Caribbean. So I think inevitably we're going to get a bunch of questions tonight about, is it going to split into two?
Well, before we get to that really quick, I just wanted to note out something kind of interesting. Is with it, the center, or what they're saying is the center is actually further south than 3 hours ago from their forecast points. So at 5 p.m., they had it, I think, at 16.4 degrees north or 16.2 is one or the other. But right now it's at 16 degrees north as of their 8 p.m. update. So they've actually shifted where they're saying the center is further south compared to earlier today.
Yeah,
Very
and
strange.
It's going to continue to do, and they're going to continue to do that because until this storm forms a well-defined center, it's not going to pull north. It's just not.
No, I don't see that happening right now, quite
It will
honestly.
continue to move due west until it forms the center. It's just dependent on when it forms the center. All the models are saying, oh yeah, it's going to form a center in 6 hours. They've been saying that for the past 48 hours.
Yes.
It's not happening.
We've been saying that for at least 2 days.
If this thing goes over Hispaniola without a center, it's dead. It's dead. Just dead.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go so far to say it'd be dead, especially that you said that the center could be further south than what it actually is.
I'm saying if that center tracks over Hispaniola, it's dead.
And I mean, out of anything, that's probably best scenario for the people living in places like Florida, because we don't really want them to get heavy rainfall and perhaps really bad storm surge.
And then you look on the infrared imagery, and the rotation is much less clear. So you can see when you look at the cloud tops that, well, it's really lacking. And I don't know if you've seen the infrared, Devon, that you might agree with me on that. The rotation looks a lot more convincing on the last visibles that we got before nightfall.
One interesting thing that I'm seeing, looking at this infrared imagery, we might have a few convective blowups in that southeastern part of the veering area. Because you can see that little blow up there just near the center where we think it is. And you can see most of the higher cloud tops are actually displaced to the north of the system. So it's a very elongated system in the sense that it's going from north and south rather than east to west. This system is just very weird. Models have been weird with it. I think everything about the system seems to be weird at the present moment.
I mean, this season has been in general.
I mean, that's kind of feeding into the forecast tracks for this right now as well. As the National Hurricane Center has said numerous times, there's a much higher than usual uncertainty for the forecast track and intensity. Right now you have the cone up on the top left quadrant of the screen.
Yep.
They're expecting to track over Hispaniola and potentially get very close to Cuba right now before likely, in that cone at least, making some sort of impact on Florida since most of it's within the 3 to 5 day cone.
Models somewhat split as well. Latest GFS came out. The 18Z run is back, intensifying it to a significant hurricane again for the first time in a couple of days. There was a period where the GFS was just developing hardly anything out of it, 50 mile an hour peak, 60 mile an hour peak, and then to nothing by the time it reached the Florida region. Now the latest GFS wants it to start intensifying over the central Bahamas, over the Dorian-ravaged areas as a 60 mile an hour storm, and then up the just off the Outer Banks as a Category 1 or 2 hurricane, and then just past continuing northeast. Won't make a landfall in the US if that was to happen, but it would come pretty close. On the other hand, you've got the NAM model, the mesoscale, calling for the center of the storm to remain south of Cuba as it comes through northwest and enter the Gulf of Mexico now. That's what it's saying. So you've got two polar opposites almost. Both of those lie outside the National Hurricane Center's cone. So it's a difficult forecast on this.
Yeah, and I think the important thing with it, and they said this in their forecast discussion, their National Hurricane Center, their latest cone is significantly west of the latest global model guidance, which has tried to trend towards more of it, the system just clipping the Eastern Dominican Republic before moving more through, at least with the center of circulation, through the Turks and Caicos and parts of the Bahamas before trying to potentially move further up the East Coast later in the forecast period. But, we're seeing a storm that continually moves further west than prior assumptions, and that's one of the reasons they've, not really shifted back as far east as they were last night. This cone is a bit to the east of what they were saying 6 hours ago at 5 or 11 a.m. Eastern. I'm sorry, but not by too much. It just shows how big of a variance there is right now with uncertainty about the exact track that the system may take and what locations could end up getting impacted. From south of Cuba for a center at a couple days out, all the way towards North Carolina is a massive zone of uncertainty for this system.
What do we make of this radar imagery right now out of Puerto Rico? It's got sort of a band with some significant rain south of the island. That's in correspondence with a convective flare-up, but generally not much out there where the center, the so-called potential center, is.
I mean, I'm noticing at the bottom of the screen, there's just a little bit of rain that's developing, this showing that it's rotating around something, but it's kind of hard to tell the exact point of where.
I don't know if it is or not there. I'm not sure if there is any rotation. It's hard to tell.
From what it seems, if there is any rotation, it is my best guess is that it is well displaced to the south.
Actually, there is a little bit of rotation there just east of Puerto Rico, actually, if you look very carefully.
I mean, you're seeing a loose rotation trying to form, but you really won't see this become a full-on tropical cyclone until we get a much more well-defined low-level center that's able to get much more spin around it. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what reconnaissance says tonight to see if we're any closer than we are this morning, but at this point in time, at least, it wouldn't be surprising, just based on how broad the system still is, if we don't get a named tropical system until at least tomorrow.
What's the recon schedule then?
There is one in the air right now, flying from Nevada. I think it says as of, but it's an old one. The last update was several hours ago. So I'm assuming, and I think K is always the one that has this good information, that they're probably going to be taking off another plane around the same time as they did last night, which is around 03Z, which is around 11 p.m. And then we'll probably get another center fix of the disturbance closer to midnight to 1 a.m. again.
That's Eastern time. Who was I going to reach out to next? Samuel, you're also here tonight. What are your latest thoughts?
Yes, I am. I have gone to windy.com to see the latest, to see some of the direction for the wind reports. Now, the wind reports are hinting at a little bit of rotation to the south of Puerto Rico, although not much is indicating it. But I'm also looking at the more immediate runs of the ECMWF as well as the GFS. And both are indicating that the rotation is kind of, just south of Puerto Rico right now. So while it's not totally
you can see it.
the
more you look at it, the
more it is. It's still quite. It's still increase. I'd still say there's some evidence. I can argue that there's evidence that there's already some rotation starting in the system. Although when we get a close low, which is when they would be able to define the tropical cyclone, is still timing of that is still uncertain, especially given how the forecasts have handled it in the last 48 hours.
And you look at that imagery again, and I think it sometimes happens when you look at it for an extended period. I think you just start to see more and more things with it. There's at least half a circulation there. I'm not convinced it's a full one, and perhaps it's two competing, or maybe even three. One way south that we've been pointing out, one in the middle there just off the southeastern coast of Puerto Rico, and perhaps even one up off the northeast coast as well.
See what you're talking about, Nathan. What an odd system.
Yeah, it's just so broad. I mean, there's, it was, we were assuming last night, kind of when we went off the air, that the southwestern side was going to kind of win the battle of dominance in terms of where we see much more consistent convective activity. But since then, that northeastern quadrant of the system, kind of, you could say its other half, if you will, has really been fighting to try to stay alive, and is making it much more difficult for this system to easily organize and finally become a tropical cyclone. And something else to note, and honestly, this is one of the best things about, having a live community, a Discord server where people are able to send in reports and stuff, is someone sending in a report right now in our server from northwestern Puerto Rico saying that the winds are getting stronger than earlier. And that they're also seeing some crop damage reported in the area, as well as loose objects being blown over. So we are seeing some impacts in Puerto Rico right now.
So it's really no different from a tropical storm. It's just the designation, really. It does have tropical storm force winds, 45 miles per hour. So hopefully people, and there is tropical storm warnings, of course, so hopefully people take it just as seriously.
Right, and I did see a report on, I think it was this Discord server earlier today, that in San Juan, Puerto Rico, a wind gust of 51 miles per hour was reported.
I mean, based on the squall lines and stuff we're seeing in association with this system, it definitely wouldn't surprise me at all.
Indeed. Right. Preston's out with a camera right now. What's that?
This is on St. Croix Islands in the Virgin Islands, as you can see, looking off at the port. As you can see, it's a fairly gusty night there, obviously being impacted by those outer bands of potential tropical cyclone 9.
Those two people look lost.
Maybe they are, but general picture is very rainy and wet night in the Virgin Islands from the outer bands.
So that's St. Croix?
Yes.
Okay. Not looking too bad over there just now. Can you tell if it's raining there?
I think it is. Looking at the, just looking from the environment, I don't know about the radar over there. I think they might have a radar site over there. I'll check it in a little bit, but definitely gusty night there, no matter what.
They might not because of its proximity to Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But that's where we're at right now, and this is the latest radar imagery from San Juan. Again, the full picture here, or as much of a picture we can get from their radar scope, which I can see what you're talking about, Codemo, earlier on, because you're starting to see just on that very edge of coverage, you've got a little bit going on. Perhaps I could mark it here. Some kind of rotation which is sort of swirling in there, which could be a potential circulation. But then you've got further north, I'm seeing this little area here looks like it's trying to rotate, and then you've got this area grappling as well. So you've got those three areas that are competing against each other at the moment, and if any of them win, if none of them win, then there will be no storm. There'll be no tropical storm. But this disturbance does have tropical storm force winds, and to a layman it's exactly the same as what you would get in a tropical storm. It's just the scientific technicalities that it doesn't have a center, so it's not a tropical storm.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's still not like in Puerto Rico there are still like rain that's going on. So
just because it isn't named a named tropical storm doesn't mean that adverse impacts won't occur. I mean, there's tropical storm warnings in place for areas where the center's already passed still for a reason. It is delivering tropical storm force winds and rainfall and flash flooding and mudslide threats that are associated with tropical cyclones in this basin. So even if it doesn't named yet and you're in the Caribbean, it doesn't mean you should be discounting it all. And I saw a question. I think now that the actual forecast cone's back up, it's a bit relevant to talk about. Someone's saying that the National Hurricane Center is way west of the model consensus. Why are they doing that, Nathan?
Way west? I've not actually had time to see the model consensus recently, but
I saw the 18Z, so I guess I could talk about it briefly. But if you're trying to say that they're going way west of the model consensus, and the consensus on the model says the 18Z is a bit more towards clipping eastern Hispaniola before tracking over the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos and trying to come up towards the Carolinas at the end of the forecast period. That's much more consistent than before.
So what were they
If you
saying
wanna
again?
wonder-
That they were too east or too west?
They're trying to say that the National Hurricane Center is too west.
Too far west.
I think the proper response to that is that two parts, really. One is that there isn't a closed low-level circulation yet, so it's much harder to predict track than you'd normally have with a tropical cyclone. This has been stated numerous times for the past 24 hours in their forecast discussions, and it still remains true. And secondly, it's already tracked significantly west of what they were expecting just yesterday in terms of an exact location. And by the looks of the latest imagery, it's continuing to do so. So it isn't really incorrect of them to make the assumption and be a bit conservative in terms of not lining up as much with the models right now when the actual movement of the storm is still kind of defying some of the odds that were set out yesterday.
I'm just going to try and get this on the screen as well, what the models are actually saying, the latest plot from Raul. Just trying to get this on the screen whilst you continue the conversation there. These are the models right now compared to the National Hurricane Center's cone. Maybe you could have them side by side almost, but there they are on top of each other. I would say that the models are slightly west of NHC. Hard to tell.
What's really interesting... Go ahead, Strat.
I was just going to say, is this the 12Z or the 18Z? Because a lot of the global
This is
models...
18Z.
Because a lot of the global models, including the GFS, have shifted towards the east of Florida location now, including the HWRF and the European as well, as that 12Z run with it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next 12 to 24 hours of that. But again, it's a very uncertain forecast, and you can see it, the zone of uncertainty really expands from Cuba and the Gulf of Mexico all the way towards the Carolinas at the moment.
It does.
Well, yesterday we saw the forecast cone was to the east, and then overnight we saw it get shift to the west. Parts of Florida, it was in the Gulf of Mexico for that forecast update or two, and now you've seen that it has moved all the way east back again to the areas east of Florida shown by the model consensus. So it's very interesting to see how far the cone has actually shifted, as we're so uncertain where the storm will actually go just due to it not having that closed center.
And something I think I should point out right now is the models that are shown, that doesn't mean that's the potential track. This thing is so broad, and because of that, the way that it will go is so uncertain. So take the models or the intensities with a grain of salt.
Has there ever been a wave so uncertain in our storm tracking years? That's a question from Tyrese Coley.
I mean, in terms of development, you could say PTC 10, I guess, in terms of uncertainty over development.
There's been a few, there really have.
Different situation than this.
Actually, well, waves and Gaias and all that kind of thing. I mean, the formation of Michael was a bit difficult. We knew it was going to be quite strong. The formation, well, I don't think anyone saw Harvey coming, did they? As it degenerated back into an open wave. I'm trying to think now.
Colin, I think, like we knew we didn't think it was going to become tropical storm. I mean, did we? No. It was right there, right?
No, I think we did. We did think it would, but well, it looked dreadful. We did. We ran coverage on that.
Yeah, I remember.
And then you've got, of course, well, the uncertainty of Dorian, but that was a tropical storm at that point. But yeah, it's one of the wackiest waves in a while, that's for sure, because it is enormous.
Oh, this is a gargantuan wave. We've said it numerous times, on other live streams and tropical weather bulletins now, that this kind of looks more akin to something you'd see in the open Western Pacific Basin rather than in the middle, or half in the Caribbean Sea, half in the tropical Atlantic to the north of it. At this point, really. But, it's more of a waiting game to see when that consolidation will occur at this point. Again, it was looking last night more likely that we'd see some significant consolidation overnight yesterday into today that would allow designation as a tropical storm. But it's really fighting to stay as broad as possible and struggling to get a tight spin at its exact location.
And there's more going on behind it as well, by the way. That little... there's a little bit of spin on that wave that's just emerged off Africa as well. I don't know if you guys want to have a little chat about that.
Might as well. I mean, it has a 10% right now, so I guess it's kind of worth talking about. I mean,
we've given it a 10%. Has the Hurricane Center done that? I don't think they have.
I'm not sure on that myself, but I do know that this thing's going to run into a ton of dry air. As we've seen before, dry air killed Gonzalo. Will it do the same with this? Possibly. I don't think any of the models really have been picking up on the storm becoming an intense storm like 92L earlier this week. So definitely something to keep our eyes on, but not really seeming to be that big of a threat as it may die because of the dry air.
Now, I've not seen the European model for a couple of days, so what is that one saying now?
I have it right now. It doesn't develop it, but similar to the 18Z GFS, it tries to track it up to the northeast of the Bahamas and in between the Bermuda region and North Carolinas as a disturbance, but not a developed tropical cyclone. So, I mean, if the models are undershooting it right now, it's something to monitor. At least in terms of development, but the overall consensus right now is that it won't develop into a tropical cyclone.
Question that we've been getting a little bit is, will this thing split?
Not likely.
Have storms actually split and become two separate tropical storms before?
It's extremely rare, and I'm not sure. I mean, the cases where it may have happened a very, very long time ago, the point where we're not really sure because of lack of imagery. There's one or two instances as well a long time ago of two storms merging, but I've never seen it in 10 years of storm tracking, 11 years, and in old imagery I haven't really seen it either.
Yeah, it's exceedingly rare for such a thing to ever really occur. So, I mean, what we're looking for when we see a storm this broad is consolidation on a single point for, the tropical cyclone to actually fully form rather than, a split in half into doppelganger twins, per se, and having two systems form instead. Usually, you'll see one part really get the center of circulation up and spinning around and getting extra convection and energy around it, and the other portion will more likely than not die off after that point. So, it's extremely rare, and we really shouldn't expect it with a system like this.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect it, but the way it's pulling itself apart almost makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Could you imagine if that actually happened, though? Oh my goodness.
People would go bonanza considering how the season's gone so far. So such a thing really happened.
Absolutely.
I don't even want to think about it.
It's 2020. You don't know what's going to happen.
Oh no.
We really don't think that kind of thing should happen right now.
Also, I think the graphic that was just on screen showing the history of the forecast tracks in the system from the National
we just
Hurricane
had that
Center is really
minute
interesting.
ago. Yeah. Should we
because it
take a look
shows
at
them
again?
putting out the initial cone for the full 6-hour advisory, then every intermediate advisory having to shift it further, or having the point come out further south and west than they were expecting.
Yes.
Basically every time.
Watch
if you
it
play
real
back that
close.
loop, you'll see the full advisory, and then almost each time a shift to the south and west of what they were saying it would end up happening just before that.
On that latest forecast, they've actually put it southwest, haven't they? Look, that last frame, they've put it southwest.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were saying around 16.2 or 16.4 degrees north at 5 p.m., and they shifted it to 16 degrees north for the 8 p.m. intermediary advisory. And, throughout this whole time, they've, still been saying it's been moving west-northwest, and, I mean, in technicality, it is, but really barely doing that. It's almost more like a due west motion rather than a west-northwest motion.
You average it all out, it's done a little bit of west-northwest, and now it's back on the flat stare again, moving west.
Yeah, I think the way to really put it is, it's gained about 10 degrees in longitude since last night, a little over that actually, but less than 2 degrees in latitude. So it's moving almost horizontally, but not quite.
10 degrees?
Yeah, it was at like 55 last night, and we're, I think, at past 66 right now.
No, surely not.
Yeah. I mean, if you pull that loop again...
I think it was closer to 60 last night.
Was it 60 degrees is after Barbados, but before some of the Lesser Antilles. So the actual center of circulation.
That's where I would have put it last night. I don't know if the National Hurricane Center would.
No, they had it further east than that. They had it.
Hmm.
You'll see. I think it's about 8 at 5 p.m. advisory. They had it about like 57, and we're closer to 66 now. So it's moved a lot to the west over the past day.
Anyway, hey, we've been chatting to each other for a long time, but the real reason that we're here is to answer your questions live on the air. So start your message with Force 13 all in text. We've answered a couple so far, but now's the real time to send them all in, and we'll get straight onto them if we can. Everyone's getting a timeout, apparently, Strat.
Yeah, we got the bot to keep the chat clean and stuff. I know some people don't like it, but it's really necessary for us to make sure that we're actually getting all the questions that people watching that may be in harm's way need to get answered. So
what I've noticed in chat is people are essentially daring each other to spell out Nightbot, and then people
wonderful.
do it.
Yeah,
anyway.
just don't antagonize it, guys. Just let it be, okay? We're here to provide information, guide you to other sources for information if you really need those as well. So.
Here's the first question then. The odds of development for the invests in the Western Pacific. Well, if you saw at the top of the show, we had 3 low chances, and I can show you the satellite imagery in the Western Pacific right now. You can see here, it's a bit of a mess right now, actually. There's a very, very broad, like just about as broad as 9L actually, area that's off the western coast of the Philippines right now. That's likely to be an extremely broad disturbance in the South China Sea, and eventually the models are suggesting there could be a storm coming out of that. Could be a threat to Hong Kong, could be a threat to elsewhere in southern China. And to the east there's a smaller little rotation there that you can just about see, just about in daylight now. And that, or maybe the area south of it, could develop into a much smaller tropical cyclone and head up towards the southern Ryukyu Islands of Japan. So that's the Western Pacific right now, and if we left it like this for a day, you'd probably see what's left of Douglas. But looking at the Eastern Pacific, you can see what's left of Douglas. On the left-hand side, it's in a sorry state. Curiously, it's still blowing up a lot of convection. Actually, it's got tropical storm force winds again, but sorry, Douglas fans, it doesn't have a circulation anymore, so it can't be redesignated. And then further east, you've got a little bit of rotation there in the Eastern Pacific. I think that's what the National Hurricane Center have given the 10% on.
Yeah, I think that one's it. Someone's asking, if the system were to move south of Cuba, like the name suggests, would it help it be stronger? And that kind of feeds into another question of someone asking if it has a better chance of going towards the Gulf of Mexico now than it did yesterday.
Well, of course it does. Every degree west of forecast that it goes increases the chances of it getting to the Gulf of Mexico. I'd probably give it a solid 20-30% now.
And I think there's another question related to this as well. If it moves south of Cuba, which would also bring it south of Hispaniola, would that help it intensify? I mean, there's a lot of factors at play with it right now. It's a much higher than unusual intensity of uncertainty when it comes to forecasting the strength of the system immediately in the near future, and also especially when we get a couple days out. So it wouldn't really be too prudent to say yet, because if it goes just south of Cuba, like the NAM is trying to say, it's still going to be facing significant land interaction with the not very strong center of circulation at this point in time, at least. So it'd be pretty unclear, really.
And if you look at the models on the screen, lots of the ones that are going under Cuba die off quite quickly.
That is also true. Someone's saying, what is the chance of this not being named? And I think we can
could you imagine?
We can just
after all of the hype you've seen so far, not from us by the way, that it doesn't get named. It's happened before in the past with
PTC 10.
Well, certain systems.
People wouldn't be happy if they're making videos out and posting news articles and everything saying major tropical cyclone forecasts for a system like this, and it ends up not even becoming a named storm. But I will say, right now at least, for the areas it's impacting in the Caribbean, that doesn't matter. You're still facing tropical storm conditions from this system, and that's why there are tropical storm warnings in place, especially if you're in more rugged mountainous terrain, you could be getting the elevated winds and higher levels of rainfall that could be producing potentially flash flooding and life-threatening mudslides. So just because this doesn't have a name at this point in time doesn't mean the people in Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands should be taking this any less seriously than they would if it was a regular tropical system.
I saw an interesting question in chat. Sorry if I keep talking, by the way, but someone was asking what the diameter of the storm is.
The
I mean, do you want
diameter
north to south or west to east?
of winds?
I think I mean the size, like the rain field, is what I presume.
Oh, I'd have to take a proper look at that one. But in terms of the wind field, northeast it's 240 nautical miles. That's the radius. Northwest is 120, and they reckon there's no winds on the southeast or southwest side. So maximum diameter, therefore, would be 240 nautical miles, which is in statute miles. It's gone rusty on this now. Somewhere near 300.
Yeah. And if you're talking about just the center of circulation with the convection it's producing as a whole, at least north to south, you're looking at a field closer to 500 or so miles north to south in diameter, at least in that regard.
At least.
West to east, it's a bit smaller, but it's a giant area of convective activity.
Yeah.
Someone's saying, who would likely win in terms of the sides that are fighting for this, the north or the south side? Well, I think the way to answer this so far, at least, is that it's been an overall consensus that the southern side's most likely the one to win out. But unexpected things do happen, so we will have to monitor in case something that we aren't really seeing does end up happening.
Questions about people's locations. I live in Texas. Should I keep an eye on this?
It's never bad to monitor tropical cyclones, but it isn't particularly likely at all that this would.
No.
It's not too likely right now that it gets towards the central Gulf of Mexico. It could get into the very eastern tip still. Some models are hinting that, but for it to get all the way west to Texas, I'm sorry, is still exceedingly unlikely at the moment in time. If something really wonky could hypothetically happen, but it's not too likely at all.
Right, there's no models showing it even getting close to that. The furthest one is the Canadian Ensemble, I believe. It's Apalachicola. That's the furthest one.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to rattle through some questions real quick here. Other locations, Orlando, thoughts?
I mean, compared to like Texas or North Carolina, I feel like Orlando's probably a one that you probably should at least be looking at, because currently most models suggest it at least going off the coast of Florida.
I will say this, if you're anywhere within that 5-day cone right now or relatively near it, because it's such an uncertain track forecast, you should be monitoring the development of the storm, keeping track to see where these forecasts adjust to in the next 24 to 72 hours. So that's 1 to 3 days. And if it becomes more apparent that you're likely to getting tropical storm conditions from this system, make sure you have your hurricane plan in place. Listen to local officials for exact location if you're in low-lying areas, for evacuation orders if they come into play, and just generally stay vigilant and prepared. It's hard to say exactly for Orlando yet at all, because the general forecast.
Looking at the screen right now, we're looking at Wyatt's screen at the moment, showing the yellows. That's 30% chance of tropical storm conditions that the National Hurricane Center have out at the moment. Then you have that shade of orange, which is hugging the southeastern coast of Florida. That's 40%. So if you want to put a number on it, that's what the National Hurricane Center is going with at the minute. The lighter shade of green, that's 20%. The mid-green is 10%, and the darker green is 5%. And then you've got the purples near the center there, that's 90% and up. So that gives you a decent indication of what to expect in the next 5 days. But these cones, like any, do change quite often. And they may get more confident with winds in various other places that they're not so confident at the moment. Let's see what else we've got in the comments section. Thoughts about the wave coming off of Africa, which we touched on earlier, but any further thoughts on that? It does look pretty good at a distance over there. It's got some rotation, but I mean, the GFS actually had it developing very briefly, a very, very short lifespan, and dying off just as quickly as it formed.
Yeah, I mean, the global consensus is against anything really significant coming out of it. Dry air should really be a massive inhibitor, fortunately, or else we'd be dealing with potentially another name system when we're already really busy with all the activity ongoing. But the consensus right now, at least, is that you likely won't see that develop. If you're looking for something to develop alongside this, there's slightly more support once we get to days 3 to 5, maybe for this wave that's more between Cabo Verde and the Windward Islands once it moves north of the Greater Antilles to try to form into something. But overall, there isn't too much support for that other than tracking it as an area of low pressure. There isn't any closed circulations on any of the major models that I've seen to date on that one. So an area of interest to watch potentially, but fortunately neither of these waves out right now are looking too likely to become tropical cyclones.
Someone's saying it might be like Irma or Dorian, apparently. Ooh. And I mean, I wouldn't say either of those, honestly. On just looking at the cone.
I mean, it's pretty far. It's already pretty far to the west, compared to where Irma was, and it's got very little motion to the north. It appears at this time, based on satellite data. So,
yeah, I mean. I get that people have, some recency bias. We all do to some extent. But, those are way different storms. At this point in longitude, Irma was a strong Category 5 and had been for at least several hours. And had already had destructive landfalls. And Dorian was already a hurricane at this longitude north of the Caribbean in open sea without any land interaction in the way to mitigate potential intensification. This is still a very broad system. Without a closed low-level circulation yet, and is not nearly as strong as either of those were at this point in time.
And at this time of year, Strat, 1 month makes a lot of difference. Late July versus late August.
Yeah, I mean, that's
absolutely
very true. So, I mean, we're looking at a system that's much less developed, significantly weaker than Dorian was at this time, and extremely weaker than Irma was at this time. Likely with much more land interaction ahead of it over the next couple days than either of those systems were having going forward as well. So it's not really any sort of fair assumption to make.
Oh, there's Irene as well being mentioned, and Matthew. Excellent, they're all coming out now.
Irene,
all of them? I mean,
Irene, yeah, that is the best out of those.
Yeah, Irene formed further. Irene didn't form in the Caribbean Sea, if I'm not mistaken. It formed north of the Greater Antilles before impacting the Bahamas. So yeah, I wouldn't really use that one as a valid analog. And Matthew formed way further south. Was impacting.
The problem is that if this thing isn't going to become a strong hurricane, which most likely it won't, then all the ones you can compare it to, people have already forgotten about. So. That's why people always come out with the big ones, because it's just the ones that everyone remembers.
One minor cyclone that I think not a lot of people remember was Erica from 2015. The cone right now looks kind of similar to how Erica was, like about in the same general wind area. Erica was barely a 50-mile-an-hour tropical storm, but Erica passed, I believe, south of the Dominican Republic. And since a lot of people are, there's a little bit of a consensus saying that it's going to pass west and not kind of northwest or north, I feel like this might go the path of Erica. Erica basically just dissipated about a little southwards of Cuba. So it's nothing to consider.
Did it get? I didn't think it got that far, actually. Did it really?
Yeah, Erica made it to South Cuba, pretty much, and then it just dissipated.
In fact, I would say it's generally better one to use as, an analog. Not saying that's going to happen, but, if we're looking at intensities at this real stage, and it also goes to serve, as a reminder that you don't need a strong storm to bring very significant impacts to land at all. There are tropical storm warnings in place with this system for a reason.
Oh, hey. There it is on the screen as well. That was Erica's track back in 2015. And the cone kept shifting south right until the last minute when it reached Cuba, and then the cone went up towards the north and it died.
Yeah, and it's kind of gives me vibes about this current storm, because if you look at it really closely, at each intermediate advisory, when they didn't update the cone, it kept just going way off the cone, and then at the last one, it just jumps way north, like the one jumps really far south recently.
I mean, to this point in its life, it's probably a better analog, although, again, this one doesn't have a close center yet like Erica did. But, again, it really goes to show you don't need a strong storm to bring life-threatening conditions. So if you are under a tropical storm warning or watch from the system, make sure you're staying prepared and vigilant and staying safe, regardless of the actual name of the system, the exact intensity that it's bringing at the moment.
And again, for those who've just joined, the reason why Potential Tropical Cyclone 9 doesn't have a name yet is because it's fighting itself for getting a circulation. Now, scientifically, the requirements of a tropical cyclone are that it has a center of circulation and convective cloud tops to become a depression or a storm. It's got the tropical storm force winds, it's got the convection, it's not got the center. That's the only reason why it isn't a tropical storm. But people will be feeling tropical storm impacts on land. So for most people, for the everyday person, it really is just like any other tropical storm, because tropical storm warnings are out. It's probably going to produce heavy amounts of rain, especially over Puerto Rico right now by the looks of things, and strong winds, which I think people have reported up to 60 miles per hour so far.
Yeah. I saw a comment here, and it said something about 60-mile-an-hour winds or something. So
I wouldn't be surprised if gusts like that associated with the storm around its intensity trying to reach up to that at least.
Especially in those really strong squalls that are pretty far away from the center, those can be pretty powerful too.
Yep, that is very true. And someone's asking a question. I think this is going to be important to go over real quick. Why do you say that the southern side is more likely to win out? They're saying the northern circulation might win out because of the terrain forcing vorticity to the north, and that's definitely a possibility.
You were the one that really said that one, Strat. You were going with that fully. I'm not sure.
It was looking much more likely last night, but if you look at the GFS, this is an important one to use. It's not clear exactly.
There's 3 areas that could do it.
Yeah, we've put focus on the south one because last night.
I hope it's the middle one, by the way, because I think that's going to go into Hispaniola and die very quickly.
We definitely hope for that, but it isn't quite clear fully which one's going to take control, and that's why you've seen the National Hurricane Center's location kind of bounce around a bit in latitude as they try to adjust and see where the full center of this thing's really going to end up. Any of these 3 really could get its act together and become a full center of circulation. The southern one was looking much more dominant yesterday, but again, compared to that to now, the northern side is really putting on a much better fight than it was last night. And the convective activity along this really broad trough system could result in a center forming in either of those, really. So I wouldn't take too much stock in, saying exactly where it'll form, whether or not, or just rather than keeping track of those centers, because any of them can really spin up the center of vorticity when we get down to the end of it.
Now, I guess we can do a little bit of a vote on this. Who thinks that this will get named at the next National Hurricane Center advisory in 2 hours?
I personally don't.
No one.
This is going to be like 60 miles an hour, and they're still not going to name it.
It's going to get close. I feel like, at least, in my opinion, I think it's going to happen within 24 hours. But next update, I still don't feel like it has enough circulation to fully be able to be named.
No.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no discrete center. You can't even pinpoint where it is. I mean, you need a closed center of circulation to have a tropical storm. And we're just not really seeing this because we have like 3 centers here that are fighting to be dominant. So I don't think it's going to be named personally at the next update unless it gets its act together really quick.
And it's hard not to stress enough how difficult that makes it for the National Hurricane Center and computer models to properly grasp the system and forecast it out and get, accurate and valid predictions that can be used any further out than just a very short time period, to be honest, because there's so much uncertainty with it. They said basically every advisory that the forecast intensity and track are at a much higher level of uncertainty than usual. And that really remains when we have these three centers potentially, or three potential areas that could form a center, really trying to fight for activity. I know we've been keeping track of the southern part a lot because it's been trying to have the most dominant convective activity. But we are trying to see some sort of spin come up in multiple areas, and either one of them could really win out. And depending on which one wins out is going to be a significant difference past the imminent time period right now for Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Hispaniola for potential land impacts down the line.
I was just drawing some of them for reference just then, and the one further north as well. Let me try and get that one. There it is up there. You can just about see where it's trying to do the wrapping all around here. So those are the three that are really fighting at the moment.
And it really goes to stress just how uncertain the future for the storm is going to be, especially with that path, and then that feeds into intensity forecasts as well. If you see the center form in the one north of Puerto Rico, which land interaction could try to force if it really chokes off the other sides, then you might see a system posing much more of a threat towards, actively towards the northern Bahamas, southeastern United States, and closer to the U.S. coastline, or just go out to sea. If you get the center one to form and it just runs straight into Hispaniola before it gets time to get too defined, then you could hopefully see it die out completely. And if the southern one wins out, then you can see further west track than what's really indicated. So it's really a battle of influence and extreme uncertainty with what's going to happen with this storm's future. And that's why it's really important, if you are in the path of the cone of uncertainty, really, that's not being directly impacted right now or about to be imminently impacted. If you're in those areas, your preparations should be complete already, and you should be doing everything you can to stay safe. It's extremely important to track the future developments of the system and just stay on guard and generally have a plan ready to go when we get a low-level center forming, if it does, which is still quite likely at this point in time. Right. 90% chance of the latest, really. So just monitor the developments very closely over the next 24 to 48 hours if you're in the United States watching this, and then you'll get a much stronger idea about what you could be looking at in your area for potential impacts.
Right, and I do want to note, though, even if you are in the cone, don't really focus on the center, because the cone in the top left corner, just notice that big orange blob, the wind field. That's the area that's getting tropical storm force winds. That's going to extend well outside the cone all the way up to day 4 or 5. And if you remember that graphic that was showing where potential winds could impact, that was a huge area too. So
absolutely.
You can put a lot of stock into the exact center of the storm, but it's always important,
I would say,
you have that the actual impacts of a tropical cyclone extend far out from the actual center, especially and really especially when you have a system as broad as this one.
There's an interesting question. Could the mountains of Hispaniola help to split the system?
That's actually a pretty good question.
We don't actually know.
There's definitely been scenarios of the Hispaniola Mountains tearing apart storms, but I don't think there's ever been a scenario where it makes two separate storms. Has there not?
No,
I
don't think so.
It's historic. That can't be underestimated. Especially if those two split sides then become their own little storms, that would be actually insane. But it can.
Right.
Yeah, I think this was talked about, this is a good argument for the northern side of vorticity that's trying to start to spin up north of Puerto Rico to win out, really, is that's going to be less affected by land interaction than the middle and southern portions of vorticity that are trying to form a low-level center. So if you see that, generally see less impacts when this general area of low pressure moves into Hispaniola. You could see it split sort of, but that would lead towards the southern and central portions being choked apart by the mountainous terrain and likely having the northern portion of the system win out more than anything else.
Right.
Very fascinating to see what will happen to this over the next few days. I can now show you what the GFS said at the 18Z model run. So you can see it starting out here, and already you can see the extent. This is the initial conditions, how widespread the tropical storm conditions are. That's all the green zone there. The blues getting toward green, that's tropical depression conditions, you could say. So here it is. It's massive influence. Still not a tropical storm there, I don't think. And around that point there, it becomes a tropical storm, because you can just about, yeah, it's probably closed off, just about closing off that circulation there. So still, you've got the tropical storm force winds displaced to the north and the east, still quite wide as well. And then it goes through the Bahamas. The wind field actually shrinks, but the storm maintains intensity. And then here we go with its second phase, becoming a hurricane and then a Category 2 as it passes very close to the outer banks of North Carolina, and then continuing northeast past Massachusetts and Cape Cod, and then eventually towards Nova Scotia and back out to sea. That's the long range on the GFS, and that could change a lot over time, but that is their latest run. And also behind it, another tropical storm forming out of one of those waves that are emerging off Africa too. So very interesting to see if that's going to be correct. GFS back to its old ways from a few days ago. When it did predict a hurricane, it backed off a lot, but now it is saying that kind of thing again.
Right. If you go back to the start of that, I just want to go over that real quick, because, you know, especially if you're looking at other websites and stuff as well, where it shows the closed isobar levels, the GFS really gives a hard fight on which center is going to end up trying to win out as well. It initializes with the north as the dominant one, then shifts to the south briefly, and then after the Hispaniola interaction, it gives it back to the north, at least in where it's spotting the area of low pressure with the system. So, the 18Z GFS run actually has what it ends up having be the main center of circulation by the time we're reaching the Bahamas, past north of Hispaniola. So seeing if that ends up happening with land interaction forcing the vorticity spin to come up north of Hispaniola, and then having what we've been tracking more potentially as a general center, which is currently south of Puerto Rico, to get choked out by the mountainous terrain, is going to be very important to watch. It's going to significantly change land impacts over time, or where we're looking for potential land impacts. We really see that end up happening. You can't really call it a center relocation because there hasn't been a center yet. But if that's where the center forms per se, you're going to be looking at a significantly different scenario than what general model initializations are saying right now.
The system is refusing to move north, says ice resistance.
Generally, you have a huge area of low pressure, though, with this kind of trough axis that is moving west-northwest, mostly west, though. It's hard to say it's refusing to move north, though, when we still have all these different setters fighting to take potential control, because if you have the one north of Puerto Rico right now, and you can kind of see it trying to spin a little bit on the visible imagery, take form, be the main storm, well, it's moved north significantly. But if the one at the very far south ends up winning out, then you really see what would be much more arguable as a more westward motion overall with the system. So, I mean, it's hard to reiterate enough how difficult and uncertain the future forecast for this system is until we get a dominant low-level circulation to form.
A question about looking at the effects in Puerto Rico.
I'm sorry?
Effects in Puerto Rico. What's expected there? It's about halfway through this storm right now.
Well, the National Weather Service in San Juan was saying that 3 to 4 inches of rain are expected, with isolated areas of 8 to 10 inches. So definitely a lot of rain expected with this system. The tornado threat, according to them, is low at this time for tornadoes embedded in the system. But it is also interesting to note that most of the shear is located on the northern side of the system. So areas to the west of the system are actually friendly to areas of less shear. Sorry about that. And so this is going to be interesting to see what the shear does to this system. As you can see, most of it is on the northern half of the storm. So what will the centers of the spin, what will they do? There's my words there.
And there's a closer look at Puerto Rico right now. Some significant rain showers moving across the island from east to west. The eastern side getting more of it at the moment. Actually, San Juan looks like it's under a sharp shower right now.
And that kind of feeds into the first key message as the last full advisory from the National Hurricane Center for impacts related to the system. The potential tropical cyclone will produce heavy rains, potentially life-threatening flash flooding, and mudslides across much of the northern Leeward Islands, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, northern Haiti, over the Inagua Islands into the southeastern Bahamas. So we are really seeing that, at least for Puerto Rico, for the one that asked, happening right now. Generally, tropical storm force winds are possible, gusting potentially higher, as we've seen reports of, and those rainfall totals, especially if you're in mountainous terrain, are something to keep a close eye on.
Well, our live tropical weather bulletins typically go on for just an hour or so, so we'll be pretty much finishing up here after one or two more questions. We do have our 24-hour live stream, which is automated and is running content all the time, latest satellite imagery, latest information, all in real time. That's youtube.com/force13/live. We'll take a few more questions here. Am I the only one hoping the wave off the African coast gets named so we won't have to deal with such a difficult name for so long with PTC Nine?
I mean, it is a difficult name, but once you get to pronounce it, it should just be quite easy.
It's like pronouncing Isaiah, but instead of just add at the s at the end, I would say, and try to really. It is honestly a bit of a hard name to pronounce, but if you think of Isaiah, you might have a bit of an easier time saying it.
Yeah, it's just Isaiah with an S. Easy. That's
Yep.
Isaiah.
Someone's saying, do you think the HC tracks will change the next few days? I mean,
Hours.
yeah. Probably. I mean, they've said that there's almost certainly going to have to be changes that come into place, especially when we don't have a closed low-level circulation yet for them to fully track and get a forecast on. You are going to be seeing changes when those form, really, especially if we see the northern side end up getting the wind with land interaction forcing that potentially to occur. That wouldn't be too surprising. If that does happen, then the storm is going to be closer to above 20 degrees north rather than the 16 degrees north positioning that it has right now, according to the National Hurricane Center. If such a thing were to occur, then you'd see very significant changes in the forecast cone, for example.
Median Egg says, welcome to Force 13 Overtime. Yeah, that's about right. But I think that would be everything at this point. Anything else that you want to run over?
I think it's just important to reiterate again for people that are here to, especially if they're under tropical storm warnings or watches right now, to make sure that your preparations are complete imminently if they aren't already and you're not being impacted by the storm. And if you are being impacted right now, make sure you're doing everything you can to stay safe. If your exact location is prone to severe conditions, make sure you're staying in exact touch with your local weather office and local officials about your exact location for potential evacuation orders and general updates about what they're expecting for your exact location. Always important to do that, and generally just stay vigilant. The region's dealt with storms like this before, and people are tough. You guys will get through it.
If PTC 9 doesn't have a name because it hasn't formed, why is it a storm anyway? Well, under a literal definition, you could classify a storm as anything that has gales, and this does have gale force winds. It's not a tropical storm under the definitions, the scientific definitions, because of the lack of center of circulation. It's the only thing it's missing. Very confusing, all these terminologies, and then you've got potential tropical storms, post-tropical storms, extratropical storms. They are all very slightly different, but let's not go there.
Yeah.
And do we think the cone will shift further west or further east?
Where the exact center is, really, to be honest.
Yeah.
You could see either or. There's massive variance in expectations right now, which is why anywhere that isn't under a tropical storm warning at the moment, it's quite unclear what impacts will be received in those locations. It's hard to say even if Cuba and parts of the Bahamas will see very significant impacts at all from the system right now as well. And especially once you get further out towards the United States, Florida, even though it's smack in the middle of the cone, is still very unclear if they'll see adverse impacts. So, anyone in the southeastern United States, getting up to the mid-Atlantic states really want to, if you're looking at the GFS a few days out, and in the Caribbean that aren't already being impacted by the storm, do need to monitor its future developments over the next several days very, very closely, as we likely get a center of circulation to form. Where that does happen is going to have a significant impact on where the worst impacts from the system could end up occurring on land. So in general, just stay close, pay close attention to the system over the next couple days.
Well, I'm sure we'll have more video updates across the channel on Force 13 as well as our 24-hour live stream. But for now, that's pretty much it from us here. So thank you very much to the team for taking part tonight in another excellent update, and we'll probably have more in the very near future. Now, it only leaves me to go through the ending of the usual Tropical Weather Bulletin format, and that's what happened on this day. On July 30th, 1996, we had Typhoon Herb, which became a Category 5 on this day, late on the day, headed towards Taiwan. That was looping around a lot. Also, Ian, Joy, and Douglas were active. Douglas, Category 2 in the Eastern Pacific at this point. And that was rapidly intensifying as well. In fact, Douglas would go on to reach 130 miles an hour, just like this year's Douglas did, according to the National Hurricane Center, although I think it was a bit stronger. And we'll leave you tonight with the upcoming names around the world in this upcoming hurricane season, typhoon season, and cyclone seasons. That's all from me at Force 13 HQ. We'll be back again soon. Have a good night. Check out our new look cyclone tracker on the Force 13 website for the latest up-to-date information. You can also find us, of course, on our YouTube channel, search Force 13, and also on Facebook and Twitter, Force 13 at Force 13 on Twitter for the latest updates. You can also help the project become even better by becoming an Ultimate Fan on YouTube. To see the full list of Ultimate Fan benefits and to join, visit youtube.com/Force13/join. With a special thanks to our top supporters this month. You can also check out our growing merch store so you can show Force 13's colors wherever you go. You can also find a link to our Discord server underneath this video in the description.